So David, look, it's the 9th of October 2022 as we record this. The Russians are threatening tactical nuclear weapon use. The American president has just said, take it seriously. It's not Armageddon yet, but it's something to be very concerned about right now. Much to their credit, and with our help and the help of other Western governments, Ukraine is really, really winning this unnecessary war that Russia started. We don't know how it ends. We hope it ends, without the world blowing itself up. And if it does, though, compare the longer term threat between China and Russia to U.S. security.
I mean, Russia is very pugnacious, and Putin, to the extent he remains in power, is very ambitious and wishes to restore the old Tsarist empire. Experts in Russian history and in him have explained that much better than I can.
Yeah, he wants to be Vlad the Great, literally.
Basically, yeah. And so there's much to be concerned about there, and we do need to see how things play out in Ukraine. It's quite fraught at this particular moment. An NSA official whom I know and think very highly of has said, though, that as you look across the range of threats as between Russia and China, Russia is like a big hurricane, a lot of Sturm und Drang and noise and big impact in the short run. But China is climate change, the longer term kind of big, grinding, pacing adversary for the foreseeable future. So this is in no way a comment about climate change per se, but just an analogy to get the point across that Russia right now is understandably the focus and is making a lot of noise and doing a lot of active stuff, both kinetically and in cyber. Chiefly against Ukraine, and has done a lot of things. NotPetya, for example, was an enormous cyber incident. But I think the people in the U.S. government, based solely now on their public, pronouncements, their threat briefings, and so forth, are thinking long-term the pacing adversary is China.
And to paraphrase the old TV ad, how do they do it? Volume. They just have, I don't think it's an exaggeration to think they have millions or more hackers at their disposal. And also they're very, very good.
They're very good, very disciplined. And yes, as another person whom I deeply respect once said, they have more smart people than we have people. So, when you have that size of a population. Now, they suffer from other disadvantages structurally. For one thing, they can have a tendency towards, groupthink. They're very organized from the top down, and that's what you get in an authoritarian society. They're extremely efficient. They can build a hospital in 30 days or something. There's not going to be any environmental impact lawsuits or any disputes about labor, or any of that stuff.
OSHA's not coming in.
Nope, not a thing, when the boss says to do it. But, their intelligence community is filled with people who are, male Han Chinese and CCP members, Chinese Communist Party members. So there is, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but they are definitely at a minimum extremely formidable and at least near peer when it comes to cyber capabilities.
But your point about sort of top-down authoritarian rule is really an important one. I have a CEO friend of mine who
wishes to adopt that style.
Runs a big software company. No, quite the opposite. Runs a big software company, and you ask him why the U.S. and some Western countries are so much better at software engineering than China, and he tells the story about visiting Beijing years ago, and one of the leaders saying, we really, really love this American jazz music that you have, and we try to emulate it, but how do you memorize all those solos?
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, so I have written a piece on surveillance trends over the preceding 30, 40 years and looking ahead 20 years, and I conclude that brief and relatively boring piece by saying, I think if we're going to prevail, when you do sort of a net assessment of our strengths and weaknesses against, say the Chinese, one of our key strengths comes from freedom and the creative destruction of capitalism and the sort of diversity of our thinking and our efforts. If you subject yourself to groupthink and top-down mentality and everything's on a 5-year plan, like I said, there's a certain efficiency to that, but it also can result in a kind of straitjacketed approach. And people who try to memorize jazz solos, that's maybe a pretty good example of what we're talking about.
One other thing I think is worth noting before we sort of move on from the threat environment, which I think we've beaten to death already, but I'll just note, one of my day jobs is as a cybersecurity attorney consultant, and I do a lot of internal investigations after data breaches. And
always fun for everybody
yes.
concerned.
Well, it's better than being the cyber lawyer when the breach happens. That's for sure. And we did an investigation, I don't know, 5 years ago at a very, very small institution, and sure enough, we found that there was code in the intrusion that was in common with some of the code that was used in the aforementioned Office of Personnel Management breach by the Chinese.
Oh.
And I went to a bunch of my hacker friends, black hat DEF CON attendees, and asked them what they made of this. And I'm not sure I entirely buy it, but I said, why would the Chinese government focus on this little teeny organization, not in the middle of nowhere, but of no apparent importance? And their theory was, and I'm not sure I can dispute this with facts, they believe China is just gobbling up everything, and they don't even need to know why they might need it later.
Well, look, I think we talked earlier about the relative size, population, and the flood the zone approach. And also, depending on what cyber tools you're using, they can sometimes get out of hand. And we mentioned NotPetya earlier, but that is an example, I think, of collateral damage being wrought. I don't think that the authors of that malware, particularly intended to, damage Maersk Shipping Company or
Russian banks.
So, but it happens. So I think if you put those various factors together, it provides a reasonable explanation for it. It may be there's something at that particular little company that's of note, but it may also be that just a very wide net is being cast, and that's going to bring up a lot of people.
So bringing this back to encryption, I think we've made a pretty strong case why encryption is necessary for government communications. And I think...
Well, look, yeah, and in case we haven't, if you're the commander-in-chief and you want to tell your guys, okay, do this thing now, and you might want to surprise your adversary, if the adversary is breaking your encryption and listening in, that will be much less of a surprise.
Much less knowing where you're going to be and when at any given time.